Hello students. Today I'm going to actually do this right. This week we're going to discuss the bureaucracy. First off, what is a bureaucracy or what is a bureaucrat? These words are often interchanged and they shouldn't be. A bureaucracy is the actual agency and the bureaucrat is the person working at the agency. But our bureaucracy is a system of non-elected officials, so of bureaucrats, who oversee, who administer government policies and government programs. Now, when somebody hears the term bureaucracy or they hear the term bureaucrat, this usually has a negative connotation to it. Why is that? And it's simply because if you look at the definition given, it is the system of non-elected officials. This is our problem, is these non-elected officials, that they hold so much power, that they hold so much sway over us. Well, who gave them this authority? We didn't give it to them, so why do they get to dictate to us what we're going to do? A perfect example of what I'm talking about would be an IRS agent, an Internal Revenue Service agent. You get that letter, you're going to be audited. Your heart starts to beat a little bit faster, you start to sweat a little bit, because this person, whom for no reason, has this authority over you. They have the ability to take away money from you. They're going to cause a lot of stress. But my next question has to be, do we need bureaucracy? The answer is yes. We need bureaucracy. Yes, we need bureaucrats. In Texas alone, in Texas government alone, there are over 220 entities which create the Texas bureaucracy. What we find is that to achieve their goals, these bureaucracies will often line up in competition for one another. What I mean by this is, what is the finite resource that bureaucracies want? They need. This is money. So we will see bureaucracies competing with one another to get that finite resource, to get that money. Okay, I've told you there's over 220 entities which create the Texas bureaucracy, so we need it. But my next question is, who heads it? Who is in charge of the Texas bureaucracy? There is no single person in the Texas government who bears ultimate responsibility for the actions of the Texas bureaucracy. So that means that there's no individual person in charge of the Texas bureaucracy. Instead, what we have are people or something called policymakers. I don't want you to confuse bureaucrats or bureaucracy with policymakers. Policymakers are the big idea people. Policymakers decide what is going to be done. The bureaucracy, or the bureaucrats, actually implement the decisions in what is hopefully the best way possible. So policymakers decide, they make the decision on how we're going to do it. Bureaucracies and bureaucrats actually do the work. They do the actual implementation. So if we need policymakers, how do we get them? Well, the first option that we see is that our policymakers can be elected. There's a number of examples of elected policymakers. The first is going to be the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the lawyer for all officials, boards, and agencies in state government. The office can employ more than 4,150 people. Duties of the Attorney General's office include assisting in child support enforcement, antitrust actions, Medicaid fraud investigation, running or taking care of the Crime Victims Compensation Fund, checking into consumer protection laws, making sure that products are safe for our use. And there are various other activities. The Attorney General is important for two reasons. The first is because the Attorney General can issue what are called Attorney General's opinions. An Attorney General's opinion is an interpretation of the Constitution, statutory laws, or administrative laws. Basically, what he is going to tell us is he is going to give his opinion on a law that we want to create or an act that we want to do. Is something legal? Is something constitutional? If the Attorney General says, yes, I believe this is constitutional, we move forward, we implement what we want to implement. If he or she states, no, I do not believe this is legal, I believe this is an unconstitutional act, we're supposed to stop right there and find another way to accomplish our goal. The second reason the Attorney General is important is because he or she represents the state and its government in both civil and criminal litigation. What I mean by this is when we are sued or when we sue, when we go to the appellate level, when we go to the highest court level, the Texas Supreme Court, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the Attorney General can argue those cases, or his office will at least argue those cases. The Attorney General's office, up to and including the Attorney General, can also argue cases in front of the Supreme Court. So they are very, very important in lawsuits in Texas. The second elected policymaker is the Controller of Public Accounts. This person is in charge of money for the state. Their main job, very important, their main job is to be the chief tax collector and chief pre-audit accounting officer for Texas. What this means is that the controller has to certify the state's approximate biannual revenue. This is a very powerful position because Texas has a balanced budget amendment. This means that our legislature cannot spend more money, send out more money than we collect in taxes and money that we take in. So every 2 years at the start of the legislative budget session, the Controller of Public Accounts will come in, talk to the legislature, and will say, okay, this is my estimate from what I've gathered in past acts. I'm using past predictive future. I'm using tax rates. I am predicting that we will take in this much money in taxes over the next 2 years. This is how much money you have to spend for your budget for the next 2 years. So very, very important job. Another elected official is going to be the Commissioner for the General Land Office. The principal duties of this office, or of this person, are managing and collecting rentals and leases for state-owned lands. They award leases for exploration and production on state lands. And they're in charge of leasing mineral rights in the state's riverbed and tidelands. I think this position is neat for a couple of reasons. The first reason is simply because this is the only agency, this is the only bureaucratic agency that actually makes money. The second reason is simply this position, the Commissioner of the General Land Office, this position is the oldest continuously elected position in Texas history. That means it's even older than the governorship. This means that we created this position when we were an independent nation. The next position I'd like to talk about is the Commissioner of Agriculture. The Commissioner of Agriculture heads the Department of Agriculture. This department is responsible for the administration of all laws, as well as research, educational, and regulatory activities relating to agriculture. So what exactly does this mean? And how does it affect us? Does it affect us? Do we care? Well, what this means is that some of the things that the Department of Agriculture is going to oversee or they're going to regulate is going to be aquaculture, growing things in water. Do we care? Nah, kind of, not really. What else is there? There's egg quality. Are you aware that when you go to the store that you are able to buy different grades of eggs? It is the Department of Agriculture that dictates these regulations, that set the rules or regulations to discuss egg quality. They also oversee the use of pesticides. Is this important? Well, I like knowing that the pesticides that our farmers are using to grow our food shouldn't be that harmful to our health. Another thing they oversee is seed quality. Why is seed quality important? This is important because what happens if, as a farmer, you get bad seed? What happens to our agricultural system if they get bad seed? That means the crop doesn't come in. If the crop doesn't come in, there's not enough food. The farmers can't make money. The farmers can't feed us. So seed quality is important. Another thing they oversee is fuel quality. Is this important to us? What happens when you get bad gas? What happens if it's not the quality it's supposed to? Or it has water in it or something to that extent? Bad gas can mess up your motor, it can mess up your vehicle. So the Commissioner of Agriculture is responsible for making sure you're getting the quality of gas that you're supposed to get. And along those lines, the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture, is also responsible for weights and measures. What does this mean? You see the weigh stations on the highways in Texas, making sure that the 18-wheelers are carrying or they are not exceeding their load. That's important for public safety. But also, let's go back to gas for a second. What is the unit that gasoline is sold in? It's sold in gallons. You go to your local gas station, you get gas. Well, how do you know you're actually getting a gallon's worth of gas? How do you know you're getting your money's worth? Well, that's due to the Commissioner or the Department of Agriculture. It is their job that once a year they will go through every gas station in the state of Texas and they will check every gas pump to make sure it's within tolerance, to make sure you're getting your gas within a certain percent. If you go look at your next time you get gas, you should see a sticker on there from the Department of Agriculture telling you it was inspected. If you think that the gas pump is shortchanging you, you can always call the Department of Agriculture and they will actually send somebody out there to test the pump to make sure it is within this tolerance. So is the Commissioner of Agriculture important, the Department of Agriculture? Yeah, they're fairly important to us. We actually need them. The last elected policymaker is going to be the Lieutenant Governor. You remember the Lieutenant Governor is an ex officio chair. This means he holds the chairs of certain boards of councils simply because he is the Lieutenant Governor. He is the President of the Senate. So the Lieutenant Governor is going to be the ex officio chair of the Legislative Budget Board, the Legislative Council, the Legislative Audit Board, these kind of things. While our policymakers can be elected, not all are elected. We also see a number of policymakers that are appointed. The first one I'd like to discuss is going to be the Secretary of State. Secretary of State, appointed by the Governor and approved by the Senate. I'm going to go over this every time. Appointments made by the Governor, approved by the Senate. The main job of the Secretary of State is to serve as the Chief Election Officer for Texas. This covers administering election laws, maintaining voter registration records, and also receiving election results. If that wasn't enough, the Secretary of State is also responsible for keeping official, business, and commercial records that are filed with the state. For example, if you want to open up your own business in the state of Texas, you have to get your license, your DBA, your doing business as. You would file all of this paperwork with the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State's office sends you your license. Another appointed policymaker is going to be the Adjutant General. Appointed by the governor with consent of the Senate, the Adjutant General is the state's top-ranking military official. They also have administrative jurisdiction over the Texas National Guard and the Texas State Guard. The Health and Human Services Commissioner is another policymaker who's appointed by the governor. This commissioner heads the Consolidated Texas Health and Human Services System. This is a super agency who manages 4 major health and welfare departments. So, example, I've included a link here. What I mean here. Health and Human Services Commission, I provided a link to everything that they do. Or you can check stats on CHIP and Medicaid, on TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, SNAP. Office of Inspector General, you can report waste, abuse, or fraud. The Health and Human Services Commission oversees the Department of Aging and Disability Service, Department of State Health Services, Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services, Department of Family Protective Services, programs that they administer that they are in charge of, Medicaid, CHIP, Texas Women's Health Program, TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, SNAP, Food Benefits and Nutritional Programs. This is basically food stamps. Family Violence Services, Refugee Services, Disaster Assistance. See, this is a super agency because they have so many things. They have 4 departments. They have so many programs that they oversee. It is considered a super agency. The Insurance Commissioner is the last appointed policymaker I want to discuss. Appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, this commissioner oversees a department that has the job of regulating the Texas insurance industry. This is actually another one who is important to us. We all have auto insurance. When do they raise rates? When they want to? That's what it seems. Actually, in Texas, what we created a few years ago when we created the position of the insurance commissioner, if an insurance company that operates in the state of Texas wants to raise rates, they must ask the insurance commissioner, they must ask the Department of Insurance for permission to raise their rates. They must prove that there's a legitimate need to raise rates and not just the excuse or the reason that we want to make more money on the back of Texans. So they have to ask the insurance commissioner, the Department of Insurance, and if the Department of Insurance says yes, they get to raise their rates. But if the Department of Insurance says no, the insurance companies are stuck. They do not get to raise their rates. We see other policymakers, and we're going to talk about boards and commissions here. Yes, the members are appointed, but the decisions are made by boards and commissions. They're not going to be individuals. The first one is the Texas Railroad Commission. This commission regulates gas utilities, oil and gas pipelines, oil and gas drilling and pumping, and intrastate, so inside Texas, intrastate railroad transportation. I like this company, this commission is neat because the Railroad Commission was actually established in 1891, and it is the state's oldest regulatory agency. We have the Texas Education Agency, the TEA. This agency helps oversee and regulates the Texas public school system, and they administer national and state education law and State Board of Education rules and regulations. The Texas Education Agency, the TEA, is sort of a liaison between the federal government and the local school districts, between the Texas Board of Education and the local school districts. This agency has many divisions, and just some examples, we're going to see accountability, research, accreditation, adult and community education, charter school administration, curriculum, dropout prevention. These are just a few of the many departments that are the many divisions that make up the Texas Education Agency. There's a number of other ex officio boards out there. Ex officio, remember, their members are members simply because they hold another elected office. One I would like to discuss real quick, my first question before I go into discussion, is having these ex officio boards good or bad? Nobody has to run for the boards, there is no favoritism, so there's no appointing. So, I mean, that's good. Our lieutenant governor is on it because he or she ran the race and they're our lieutenant governor. Our governor is on it because they won the race for the governor's mansion. So, I guess you could say this is a perk. But like I said, is this good or bad? I want to give an example of a board. It's called the Texas Bond Review Board. The members consist of the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, and the controller. The purpose of this board is to approve all bonds and other long-term debt of state agencies and universities. Now, this is why I'm going to ask, is this good or bad? Because if you think of who's on there, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, and the controller, how many of these people actually know about numbers? How many of these people should actually have an accounting background? It's going to be one, the controller. So we might find ourselves having 3 of the 4 members making decision on long-term debt activities when they have no clue on accounting, no clue what their decisions are going to affect down the road. So once again, is this good or bad? That's going to be your opinion. The bureaucracy and public policy. We're going to discuss here, basically we're going to start discussing who the bureaucracy serves. Clientele interest groups. These are the groups that are most concerned with the laws and policies that are being administered by a government agency, by these bureaucracies, by these bureaucrats. Why would the clientele interest groups be concerned about laws and policies being administered? And what I mean, how would it affect them? Could be how would it fund them? This type of thing. Well, they're interested because it is this type of thing. The bureaucracy, these laws, how they're administering them, have a direct effect on clientele interest groups. How they can go about getting their problems solved. Now, clientele interest groups can be private groups. They can also be public groups. We see these bureaucracies, they understand they have to serve this clientele interest group. But what do they want? What kind of interest group do I mean, or do they want? And what I mean by this question, do they want public or do they want private? We see that these bureaucracies, they would prefer to serve large, powerful, influential clientele groups. Why is this? Because these large clientele groups have more impact on the Texas legislature. They have more of a say. I'll give you an example. We have two agencies. One serves business. One serves the energy companies. The other serves the poor who are in need of mental health. Which group is going to have more effect? Which has the larger, more powerful interest group? Well, it's going to be the group that has energy companies as clients. Why? Because they have money. They have power over the Texas legislature. It is important to have these powerful interest groups, these powerful clientele groups, because they will then report back to the legislature, oh yes, the agency, the bureaucracy is doing very well. They're serving us well. In return, we will see the legislature give this bureaucracy, give this agency more money, more authority. Remember, money is a finite resource, so the more you get, the better off you are, the more highly you are regarded. Who's going to pay attention to a group that represents homeless, mentally ill people? Nobody. So these bureaucracies want powerful, strong, impressive, influential clientele interest groups. Can the legislature and their presiding officers help bureaucratic power? Can the legislature and their presiding officers, so this is going to be the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor, help an agency, help a bureaucracy grow their power? The answer is yes. This can happen in a couple of different ways. The legislature and the presiding officer have legislative oversight of agencies. What this means is that they will contact the agency, they will say, come in for a review. We want to see what you're doing. We want to make sure that the law is being implemented the way we intend it to. We want to make sure you're being effective. The agency goes in, the legislature examines the agency. They say, hey, you're doing a wonderful job. You're doing exactly everything exactly that like we want you to do. So you can continue to do a good job. We're going to give you more money. Or it might be, you're doing such a good job, we're going to give you more authority. We're going to give you authority over this area also. Well, if they're given power over one area, over a different process, that power has to come from another agency. So the state legislature, the presiding officers, can help bureaucracies gain in power by granting additional funding and by granting additional authority. They can increase the scope of its duties, or they can increase the scope of its power. They can protect it from unfriendly interest. Finally, the governor. While Texas has a plural executive, remember this means that the governor shares many powers with other elected officials, the governor still has some powers over the agencies. And other than the appointment power, the governor can influence agencies by using his line item veto power. Remember, the line item veto applies to appropriations. It applies to money. So what this means is that the governor can go through a bill, can veto appropriations while passing the whole bill. So this means that just because you're an agency and your funding is tied into a certain bill, just because the governor signs the bill into law does not necessarily mean you're going to get your funding. The governor can have a line item veto, and he can strike your funding from the bill. So yes, the governor does have some power over the bureaucracy, over these agencies.